Love GAA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
Since the dawn of the GAA in 1884, the telling of its stories have been just as important as the sports. Through the years, heroes and matches have been immortalised, inspiring generation after generation. But some of its most important stories have also gotten lost or turned into legend. And in this series, we will explore some of the GAA's most fascinating forgotten tales, separating rumour from reality and myth from the truth that is often more amazing than the fiction.
And we're back. Over the Bar, the GAA History Podcast. And Michael, today the big question, is why is Hill 16 called Hill 16?
Yeah, plain and simple. I think whenever we were kind of sitting down kicking around this, we were sitting down and kicking around this podcast both at the same time. This was the kind of question that you wanted to get your teeth into. Genuinely, so many people think they know why Hill 16 is called Hill 16 and how it got its name and all the rest of it. But the reality is quite different to what the general common legend is, that, you know, the terrace was built from the rubble of the GPO after the Easter Rising, and
I'm just checking these off. Had heard that one. Yep.
There was the one that the O'Rahilly, one of the 1960s.
Yeah, his car is buried in the hill, right?
Not quite. No. If you were standing on the hill, you heard something rumbling underneath your feet. It was not a very, very old car ticking over.
A Model T Ford of some description.
Some kind of a jalopy of some description. No. What else? What other kind of legends would have been over there? They were the kind of the main ones, and that it was, basically a kind of a standing tribute to the fallen of the Irish independence movement. None of this actually is true. It was. I mean, the short answer to the long question before we get into it is that it was named that as a kind of it was almost, I suppose, politically and culturally expedient for the GAA to call it Hill 16 very soon after Irish independence, because it placed them in that sphere with the Catholic Church and the government and everything else, and put them as, I suppose, the preeminent sporting organisation in the country. And to do that, they wanted to tie themselves to the revolutionary story, when in actual fact, Hill 16, for donkeys of years before the early 30s, was called Hill 60, and had a hell of a lot more to do with defending king and crown than it did to liberating Ireland from 800 years of subjugation.
Okay. Now my mind is blown. I'm trying to imagine 1920s Dubs fans on the hill singing Hill 60, la la la.
Yeah, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue the same way, does it? It's just kind of a 60, a T. That T is too hard, isn't it?
So what's the story?
So, I mean, I suppose before we go right back, it might be instructive to start at why now we think it was always called Hill 16, where that came from. And it's a good old yarn, and it's one of those ones that it comes out of this, it doesn't matter how you work a GA season, whether it's a split season like we have now, or whether it's like the 12-month odyssey that used to be before, or when there was league matches before Christmas and all this kind of stuff back in the way back. There's always a dead time. There's always a period where there's nothing happening. In January 1966, such a period was occurring for Raymond Smith.
Okay, I can see this one already. It's 50 years since the Rising. How do I get my GA Rising story in?
And
this is Raymond Smith, the Gaelic Games handbook. Raymond Smith, you're talking about.
Exactly, the man who wrote the records book that we all refer to, and still do really all these years later, and many, many other books. He was a very interesting chap. He was born in Clare back in 1932. A Clare man who went to school in Thurles CBS, very high achiever. He's excelled in English when he was there. He started with the Tipperary Star as a cub reporter, became the sports editor of a newspaper that I don't think is in operation anymore, the Munster Tribune in Clonmel. He was 22 when he took that job on. He moved to the Irish Independent, the Sunday Independent. And for a lot of us, Raymond Smith was our first introduction to any kind of GA literature, really. I mean, when I was growing up at home, we had the Clash of the Ash and the Hurling Immortals were the two. They were the only two. Those two books, plus Christy Ring's autobiography by Val Dorgan, they were the holy trinity in our house, even though I grew up in a Tipperary house. They were the three books we had. That was it. And there were other GA books on the go at the time. Obviously, like Mick O'Connell would have written an autobiography, and going way back, we would have had books written about how to play Gaelic football by Dick Fitzgerald and all these. But as a mass marketing piece of work, I don't know about you, Ciaran. Would you had the Football Immortals as well and all that? Did you have any of his at home?
I've all of his. Yeah,
you had them all. There you go. You're a Smithite. So. He wrote 22 books, as a matter of fact.
Okay, then I definitely don't have all of his books. But I have his better known tomes.
Yeah. Like he wrote on so many, like Gaelic games, horse racing, politics were his three things. So horse racing, he wrote a couple of books about Vincent O'Brien, the trainer. A lot of books on GAA. He wrote a book. He was in the Congo in 1960.
Yeah, because his nickname. From memory, I'm just thinking when I was certainly starting out at work, they used to refer to him as Congo Smith.
Yeah, just call him Congo. Congo's book, that would be the reference. Do you have Congo's book? That someone would be looking for the reference book. Yeah. So I mean, when you think about it, like he went to the Congo to cover a civil war there, which was a very, very brutal civil war. There was Irish soldiers among UN peacekeepers there, so he was there with Cathal O'Shannon was another reporter. Whenever Smith passed away, Cathal O'Shannon just described him from that time. He said he was the most wonderful, brash man and the most outrageous reporter. So I think what he meant by that was that he was, at that stage of his life, he was quite fearless in the way he threw himself into things. So but equally, he would have, I mean, no more than most journalists, he would have kind of divided opinion in different ways and shapes and forms down the years. But for a lot of us, his literature was kind of certainly was my introduction into GA history for a start. Like, I mean, growing up in the 80s, reading about, Mick Mackey and Christy Ring and Jimmy Doyle and John Doyle, and he would have first-person interviews with them. So these books are now, they're very important, like just to have those people on the record talking about different things. But anyway, he went to Dublin. Actually, funny enough, he was a member of Elm Park Golf Club in Stillorgan.
Yeah, so potentially could have been the location of Croke Park.
That's exactly Elm Park. Any listeners might remember this place came up as one of the options that the GA were looking at, either Jones's Road, what became Croke Park, or a big chunk of Elm Park. And he actually ended up being a member of the golf club there. So I don't know, I presume he was aware of its history as well. So it's a nice little thing. Actually, hurling was his thing. Hurling was his great love. Funnily enough, he was asked, or I don't know, was he asked or did he volunteer this once? I'm not sure. But his dream death, the way he wanted to go out, was to be on the Killinan End Terrace in Semple Stadium at a Cork Tipperary Munster hurling final, to die on the terrace, and then to be lifted out by the spectators over their heads and laid out on the sacred soil. So there he would ascend to heaven, although I suppose in his mind, he was already there.
That's he's a bit of a dramatist.
Well, it'll give you a sense of the guy we're talking about. So, as I say, January 1966, he does a piece early January in the Sunday Independent that is essentially about what it was like in the good old days, back in the early part of the century. And it's kind of part of a series that he's working on over the next couple of weeks, just basically to fill gaps, I would say. And in the middle of this piece, it's almost offhand because he's actually talking about 1913, but he comes around to talking about 1916. And he says, Cheers were still raised for the military on parade. He's talking about 1913. And the citizens hardly imagined that Hill 16 would, in 3 short years, be going up from the rubble of the city buildings shattered by shells during Easter week. I met an old Dubliner in a pub in Middle Abbey Street, which would have been, by the way, next door to the Independent offices.
I'm assuming the Oval pub.
I can only imagine, because that was where everybody went. Who recalled over his pint getting 6 shillings a load for carting the rubble to Jones's Road. So in the modern telling, that is really where the idea that Hill 16 was built from the rubble of the GPO came from. And somewhere along the way, the O'Reilly's car gets pushed into the rubble and crushed down and made into this thing. When, as I say,
what kind of handcart would you need to have carry the O'Reilly's car down to Jones's Road from O'Connell Street?
Well, I'd like to think you got more than 6 shillings for that particular load anyway. I mean, probably took at least 2 cart loads. But there we go. That's where this idea really came from. And that story was told all for the last 50, 60 years. But as I said, the actual reality of how it came to be Hill 16 was entirely different.
We know now where the myth comes from. So how do we bust this? Where does the Hill 60 story come from?
If you go back, Croke Park is bought by the GA, or the site on Jones's Road is bought by the GA in 1913 called Croke Park. So they start to kind of kit this place out to take big crowds that they're drawing. So one of the things they do is they develop a mound behind what we would call, let's call it the railway goal, the railway end. It's still called the railway goal from time to time, better known as Hill 16, obviously now. But and at that time, it was sort of, if you can imagine, it was flat. If you go from the Nally Terrace, let's say, in the modern architecture, it's kind of flat, going across where the goals are. It's flat, but it starts to rise then. This is back in 1915, and it starts to rise. And around kind of the right-hand half of the back of the railway goal, coming around to the Cusack stand side, as we know it now, is a mound. It's a tall mound. And it gets called, not officially, not in any kind of formal way, but people call it Hill 60. And the reason they call it Hill 60 is because in 1915, around the same time that this mound, this terrace was coming into use, there was an enormous battle in World War I, Gallipoli, in August of 1915, that consumed an amount of Irish soldiers. So it was a battle for a hill called Hill 60. Called Hill 60, Ciaran, because it was 60 metres above sea level.
That tended to be how there was another Hill 60. Yeah, there was another Hill 60 that was 60 feet in Ypres. But yeah, right. So this is 60 metres in height or 60 metres above sea level, one or the other. Yeah,
sure. So like it's a combined force are trying to take this hill. The Turks, who are the opposition in this particular theatre of combat in World War I, they hold it. Yeah, up top, trenched in up top. And they are being assaulted now by a mix of Australians, New Zealanders, Gurkhas, and the 5th Battalion of the Connacht Rangers, which had been raised in Dublin the previous August 1914. So you have about, according to the Imperial War Museum figures, you have 945 Irish soldiers and 29 officers. They land in very early August 1915, and they're pressed into action about 10 days later. The actual battle goes on for about 3 weeks for the hill. In the very first day, there are 198 casualties out of that 1,000 or so.
So this tallies with what we know of the Gallipoli campaign, which is that it's butchery.
Yeah, butchery, hand-to-hand combat. Nearly 90 men are killed out of that 198 on the first day. The newspapers are full of reports from Hill 60 and full of reports from that theatre of war, all sorts of stuff. And by the end, that 945 soldiers and 29 officers, are reduced to 180 soldiers and 5 officers. And by the end, I mean, they're attacking the hill with it's just a hodgepodge. It's just whoever's still standing, Gurkhas, Australians, New Zealanders, and they don't take the hill. So it's a military and a humanitarian catastrophe, really, again, in keeping with most of that war.
But it's sold at the time as a victory. I've seen, recruitment posters in Australia, we took the hill, come and join us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's one of these, again, it just gets spun in a particular direction. You read in the papers a lot of stories of, and I mean, it's genuine heroism and narrow escapes and guys getting their helmets shot off 2 or 3 times and all this kind of stuff, and they still go up the hill, all this kind of stuff. And because there's such a large, obviously it's a battalion that's been raised in Dublin, so the Dublin casualties are very high. So over time, going into 1916 itself, Hill 60 is Hill 60, and no one, even after the Easter Rising, no one is calling it.
Are the GA naming it Hill 60, or is it just this is how the populace see it?
It's how the populace see it. There is no official name for anything at that point in Croke Park, apart from the name Croke Park itself. So this is purely from the population, the people who go, you're going to see on Hill 60. The media, the newspapers at the time describe that area as Hill 60. So there is no mention of a Hill 16 until well into the late 1920s. In fact, 1930, 1931 is really when Hill 16 becomes a thing.
Love the free episodes of Over the Bar? Then take your passion further with the Cordia Club membership. For €5 a month, you'll unlock bonus series and member-only shows, hear the podcast first and ad-free, and get behind-the-scenes access through detailed notes, a newsletter, and Q&As. It's the ultimate GEA history experience, curated by Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara just for you. Upgrade your listening, support the show. Join today at overthebar.club.
But this is a thing in Stadia at the time, that areas within it are named in homage to battles, like the Cop is the Spion Cop. You know what I mean? So there's...
From the Boer War, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the thing. So right through the Rising, past the Rising, up until the birth of Congo Smith, you said he was born in 32.
32, yeah.
Yeah. So it's still Hill 60 in terms of how the GA public see that area of the stadium.
Now, it is starting to cause some disquiet among the hierarchy that it's called Hill 60, when there's a lovely opportunity here to call it Hill 16. And to be fair to the GA, in that era, there's a few things that are worth keeping in mind. First of all, after independence, the Free State is established in the early 20s. There is no sort of what we would recognize as sporting investment. There is no central government, funding sport, helping to build facilities, all that kind of stuff. It's all being done mainly by the GAA, really. They're building they're ambitious. They build up their stadia, particularly Croke Park itself, over the years.
They get a grant for the Tailteann Games.
Yes, correct. They get a grant for the Tailteann Games, and they hang on to the stand that gets put up for the Tailteann Games, which is eventually called the Hogan Stand. But again, they're thinking big all the time. So in that way, they're kind of looking and going, well, they're the preeminent sporting organisation, and more so, there's an opportunity to position themselves in this new Ireland as a preeminent sporting organisation, and a very effective way to kind of copper fasten that idea is to tie yourself to the revolutionary cause. Like, even for Bloody Sunday, for years afterwards, it was said, when the British wanted to make a point, they didn't go to Lansdowne Road, they went to Croke Park. Maybe some other time we'll come back and tell that story in a slightly different way, but that was the narrative. That was the way it was being shaped. So around 1930, 31, you start to see references to Hill 16. And one of the big things that happens in 1931 is the Irish Press is formed. And it actually goes straight into their style guide that Hill 60 is now Hill 16. To such a degree that, and keep in mind, like, people have been calling this...
For the layman, you're a newspaper man.
Yeah. What a scoop.
A style guide is something that most newspapers have for their publishing staff, so that they understand what is expected of them. So
exactly,
we've seen in the last year big disputes about the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, and style guide usage, etc. So what you're saying is that when the Irish Press is formed, they put in the style guide that this is Hill 16.
Exactly. So, like you say, style guide. Like, so a very simple example of a thing that would be in style guide is how do you on paper say 1, 2, 3, the numbers. So ordinarily, if you pick up most newspapers, 1 to 9 will be written, but from 10 on, you get the numerical version. So 1, 0, 11, so on and so forth. So that kind of really basic stuff, so that there's uniform style throughout the whole newspaper. So, yeah. So Hill 16 is in. And if to the degree, they enforce this to the degree that they actually they printed an apology when a reporter mistakenly referred to it as Hill 60 at some point after that. So it's very, very much, it's there. They want to imprint this. It's obviously coming from the GA. It may well be coming even, given that the Irish press was a Fianna Fáil paper, I suppose, organ. Yeah, it's coming from there as well. So you have that push. When the Cusack stand is inaugurated in 1938, Padraig McNamee, the GA president, refers in his speech to the Hill as an ever-constant reminder of the gallant band who made the supreme sacrifice that this land of theirs might be Gaelic and free. So you have this thing going on. There are, again, going back to the whole idea of the rubble, even before Raymond Smith, there are letters. There's a letter to the Meath Chronicle mentioning this in the 1930s, that these men who will be, I think it's a 1939 All-Ireland final, Meath are playing in football, and, it's mentioned that they'll be facing the tricolour that will fly above Hill 60, Hill 16. And it's, it's there in respect to Ireland's fallen heroes whose blood stain the debris in that immortal hill. So it's all there. It's all building up to this idea. We're going to call it, it's Hill 16, lads. Stop calling it Hill 60.
So when is it formalised? Because if we go there now, as you're going through the turnstile, you'll see the Dineen Hill 16 terrace. There's a nameplate. So when is it formalised within the GAA?
It's a bit like Hill 60 in the first place. It never quite gets formalised. Certainly in the 1930s. I mean, think about where we're going with. It's like September 31. I mentioned the Irish press in 1931. By the late 30s, you're getting letters in the paper kind of mentioning this rubble myth. In September 31, at a meeting of the GA Central Council, Dan McCarthy, who was a former GA president, objected to the name Hill 60, formally objected to it. He said Croke Park, he said, was sacred ground, sanctified by the blood of martyrs, which is referencing, again, it's a Bloody Sunday referencing specifically, I suppose, Michael Hogan there, the Tipperary player who was shot and killed, the only player who was shot and killed on the day. So again, it's kind of, the walls are closing in on Hill 60. If you're asking me when it was officially changed, when it was actually nailed down into, rule, if you like, or into officially formed, you're probably talking 2006, when the redevelopment of the modern Croke Park was done, and they decided to add Frank Dineen's name to the terrace as well. Frank Dineen, who the GA bought the Jones's Road site originally from. So it's now officially it's called the Dineen Hill 16. But I mean, in the same way that Hill 60 was Hill 60 for 15 years or more back in the early part of the 20th century, and it's Hill 16 ever since, I think it's always going to be the Hill.
Like, it's just one of those things. Have you got a Hill ticket?
Yeah, it is what it is. And I mean, it's nice to think, okay, it's got a very, when you start to think about it, it's got quite a provocative history in terms of being, I suppose, a monument to a World War I catastrophe that claimed a lot of lives of men from the city in which it's built. The casualties from that particular battle were largely Dublin in terms of the Rangers. So if you think about it, you have that sort of memory, or that attempt to memorialize just among the people, moving on to the politicizing of a terrace, really, to place yourself in a more, to have yourself seen in a better light, not in a better light, but in a light that you can now share with the fallen of 1916. When in actual fact, yes, there was a lot of GA members were out in 1916, and a lot of GA members were involved in the War of Independence and the Civil War, but the GA itself always stayed apolitical, so it was never really expressive of its position. If anything, it tried to avoid, I mean, Bloody Sunday alone, 1920, if you look at the minutes from county board meetings in Central County, there is no mention. There's hardly a mention of Bloody Sunday, because they're just trying to move on. We're playing our games regardless of what's going on around us. But by 1930, suddenly it's quite advantageous and quite useful to tie yourself to that period and have yourself seen as, I suppose, the sporting wing of a revolution. That's what they're going for. Then by the 60s, it takes on another You know, that, I suppose, myth is reinforced again by the story of the man loading the rubble and pushing it up to... Can you imagine, by the way, loading the rubble from the GPO and pushing a wheelbarrow from O'Connell Street up to Jones's Road? I mean, you do it for... I don't even think you do it for the 6 shillings. I'd say half the rubble would fall up, but you probably get 2 shillings by the time you got there for the amount to be in the wheelbarrow. Like,
it certainly sounds like a struggle, and I mean,
it would have been unbelievable.
It's so of the time as well that I heard a story in a pub.
Like, this is it. It's like I met a man who told me a story, and suddenly it's in the Sunday Independent the following week.
I mean, if your man's leaning over and he goes, "Wait till I tell you," the next words out of his mouth that you're expecting are, "I was in the GPO," or you're not expecting, "Geez, I was wheeling barrows up and down the Jones's Road."
It's gas. It's of its time. But ultimately, and I think this is where you come to when you say it's just called the Hill. I think ultimately, if we think of the Hill, we think of Dubs fans, probably primarily.
Yeah.
But we also think of an iconic terrace. And I hate the word iconic. I really do. And I think it's overused. But I think in the case of Hill 16, it is an iconic piece of Irish sporting architecture that survived a redevelopment. I mean, I remember when John Inverdale famously, I think, wrote a piece for one of the newspapers in England. I'm going to say the Telegraph, but I could be wrong. Around the time...
It was the Telegraph or the Guardian, around the time that the rugby was coming in.
Yeah, and he likened it to the old shelf at Murrayfield and spoke in general terms about when they change that and when it becomes a bowl, it's going to be an incredible stadium. The reality being, it was never coming down because it speaks to something about the entire GA ethos, I think, that you can have this incredible kind of corporate space, if you like, this kind of 21st century expression of modern sports for better and for worse, with all the advertising hoarding and with all the comfortable seats and the beautiful views and all the good and bad that comes with that and all the dilemmas that brings. And then at one end, you have this very fine...
Standing room only,
a concrete terrace that people can go on, and the tickets are a hell of a lot cheaper than the stand tickets still, even though they're not cheap. But the point is that you have this space that is forever of the people. Without wanting to get too socialist Jewy-eyed about it, it is a place of the people, and it's a place where people go generation upon generation upon generation. They have their spots and they go there, and it's a great thing.
Love GEA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
That is because the redevelopment of the stadium occurs in an era post-Hillsborough. That's the context where everybody's talking about all-seater stadia and you can't use terraces if you have them. Now, we're coming back to this situation where they have standing seating in certain grounds now and all that kind of thing. But like the terrace dies out and the one holdout in the major stadia across Europe is Hill 16.
Is the Hill. Now, to be fair, it is redeveloped. In parallel with the redevelopment of the rest of the stadium, the terrace is brought up to standards that would be acceptable. I remember there was a piece in the Sunday Tribune in 1999 for the Armagh Meath All-Ireland football semi-final, a terracing expert who had written extensively on Hillsborough. He was a professor who was brought over and asked to go and stand on the hill for that 1999 All-Ireland semi-final and give his assessment of the state of affairs. And he said it's not good. It's not good. Like, if people remember from that time, okay, you had the concrete terrace, but you also had a grassy bank down the back that was quite slippy and slidey if you were coming down. It was a quite shallow angle. It wasn't as steep as it is now. And if people think back again to the 80s, I mean, there was a number of Dublin matches where there was trouble on the hill. And, so it was never what you would call, it was for its time. It was always of its time. And in the same way now, it is of its time. It's an excellent terrace. It does the job very, very well. But it has evolved. It has evolved over the years in ways that it has to evolve, just for safety and for people's comfort on it. But fundamentally, essentially, it has always exceeded and got beyond its historical baggage, if you like, whether it's, if you want to call 1916 baggage, if you want to call the World War I story baggage, the politics that attach to it. It has never been weighed down, but it's always got beyond that. No one thinks of that stuff, which is good. And that's, in a way, it's good that people don't actually know why Hill 16 is exactly called Hill 16. They have an idea that they're rising something, but it's not really fully formed in their heads, the story, because the story of Hill 16 really should be just about what was described in the late 1920s as this moving mountain of people. And that's, I think, how we should always try and remember Hill 16, see Hill 16.
Well, the one evolution I was not expecting to learn about was the evolution from First World War Memorial to 1916 Rising Memorial. And if you are intrigued by the naming of the hill, our Cordial Club members this week can join us for an episode on some of the other parts of the stadium and where the names come from, when we'll be joined by Ciaran Murphy. So if you are a Cordial member, enjoy that episode. If you are not, and you want more of a deep dive into GAA history, then come join us. Join the club. Become a Cordial member. We'd love to have you.
We really would. We actually really would. It's quite lonely, us just two talking to each other, wondering is anybody listening out there.
That's where we'll leave it. Thanks again for listening. It's been our pleasure to bring another little piece of GAA history to you. It's Slán from me.
Slán from me. Talk to you soon.